Councillor McDonald? The mics are on, everyone's.
Can't say anything bad.
All right, Madam Clerk, can you do roll call for us, please?
Councillors Claude McIntosh.
Here.
Elaine McDonald.
Present.
Sid Gardner.
Here.
Dean Hollingsworth.
Present.
Caroline Hébert.
Présente.
Councillors Maurice Dupel.
Present.
Glenn Grant.
Present.
Todd Bennett.
Present.
Justin Towndale has sent in his regrets, Madam Mayor. And Councillor Éric Bergeron.
Present.
And Madam Mayor.
Présente. We acknowledge that we are gathering on the traditional territory of the Mohawk people of Akwesasne. I am very glad to see all of you physically distanced here, each one with your parel. And I'm very happy to be able to talk about some of the issues on the agenda tonight, which are very focused on what the City of Cornwall has been doing this past little while. City employees have been extraordinarily busy and focused on all things COVID-19 in terms of response. And it's been a really, really difficult but really good process to see exactly how competent our city really is to deal with emergencies. I know that it's frustrating from a strategic plan point of view. There are a lot of things that feel like they're on hold while we get through this, but we can see a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel. We heard the Premier, Doug Ford, this week start to pivot towards a slow and gradual reopening. In the several meetings already, and it's only Wednesday that I've had with Dr. Paul, he too is very in tune with that message from the Premier and that message about being confident throughout the reopening process. So it's very much about testing and continuing to test and also continuing to do the contact tracing. That is extremely important. So we need to know that Dr. Paul and the hundreds of staff at the health unit are able to test, and whenever somebody tests positive, that there is very rapid contact tracing. And that way we're going to feel more confident as we move towards reopening things. There's much pressure on the province to reopen everything to do with outside initially. So there's been lots of talk about landscapers and parks and boat launches and marinas. So that continues to be top of mind because the weather is starting to get really good. And from our perspective, well, tonight you're going to be hearing about the financial impact of the city. You're also going to hear about how successful the city has been in terms of responding to issues as they come up. So it is with hope that we start the agenda tonight, and I will remember that Councillor Dupel is on the telephone, so if I forget, please don't hesitate to let me know. I want to make sure that Councillor Dupel is included in all of our conversations. And I just want to thank the people of Cornwall for listening to the rules. For the most part, we've done pretty well in terms of the numbers here. People have done the physical distancing and have been respectful overall of enforcement and rules. And I want to thank everybody for their patience. La ville de Cornwall, les résidents ont été très patients pendant cette pandémie. Ils continuent à être patients. And I'm pretty proud to be the mayor during this time. It's difficult, but I'm pretty proud to see how the community and how the city of Cornwall and management and employees have stepped up.
Point,
Yes,
if we
Councillor
could,
Grant.
from the last meeting that I was part of at home,
Yes.
people could speak directly into the mic because it's very frustrating because we have a tendency to turn on it and you don't hear. So if you could speak directly into the mic, it would help Councillor Dupel at home.
Thank you very much for that. So, adoption of the agenda. I'm going to look for a motion. Councillor McDonald, Councillor Gardner. Any discussion? All in favor? Carried.
Favor.
Thank you. Any disclosure of interest? Yes, Councillor Hébert.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. At the last meeting, I disclosed interest on the Social Services Relief Fund, and I will do so again. So that is item 6.3 on the agenda.
Thank you. Councillor DePel?
Yes, Madam Mayor, I'd like to declare conflict of interest as for the Social Service Relief Fund, as I'm chair of the Agape Center in a volunteer role, but also I'm not certain, but I believe through social services, because they're handling the funds for Stormont, Dundas, and Glengarry, I believe Community Living Glengarry may be applying or have applied, and I need to declare that I'm an employee there. So I'll declare conflict of interest.
Great. Thank you, Councillor DePel. Any other disclosure of interest? We'll move on. Committee of the Whole. We need a motion for that. Councillor McIntosh, Councillor McDonald, all in favor? Carried. Resolution and reports. I'm going to turn to the CAO to introduce 6.1.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So I was contacted a little over a week ago from the Raisin Region Conservation Authority. They have submitted an application through Infrastructure Ontario for a pumping station for Fly Creek. That program, if it's successful, would yield upper levels of funding to the tune of 73.3%, which would leave about 26.6% for the city to cover. Investing in Canada has come back and asked if the Conservation Authority has a resolution from the Municipal Council to support this project. So I would indicate to Council that that means that there's probably a very, very good likelihood that our application is going to be successful. My recommendation to Council is that they support the resolution. What would end up happening from a budget perspective, there's about $66,000 that would be covered by our municipality, and that would be budgeted in 2 years. We would budget half of it in 2021 and the other half in 2022. Because of the mechanism for funding, and this project lies solely within our municipal area, it would be a City of Cornwall project, and our municipality would be responsible for that other funding. So I'm certainly very appreciative that they were able to submit the application on our behalf. It's a great project.
So are there any questions? Councillor McDonald.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So my question would be to his CAO, I presume. We've often talked about this area, and like, for example, we're going to extend Nick Kaneb Drive up there, and we did a lot of work on the roadways in there already. And I think maybe on the pond in Fly Creek. This is something we were going to have to do at some point anyway, isn't it?
Madam CAO.
So thank you, Madam Mayor. Yes, this would be, I believe that this pumping station might be original, so it's part of asset management. It would be part of what we want to go on to maintain, and you're correct. We would have to do it anyway. There was an opportunity here where they were able to take advantage of the application, and so that's why it's in front of council tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Grant.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm just thinking about a preventive maintenance program. Being part of maintenance in my work life, I look at a lot of these. This looks like a lot of them have fallen through the cracks as far as preventive maintenance goes, and it's frustrating to look. I looked at the extent of all these and went, man, these should have been addressed before now. You wouldn't have to have the accumulation of all these maintenance issues. So I would. I would go back to that group and ask them what their preventive maintenance program is, because it sure isn't being adhered to if they have one.
So there are a couple of councillors that sit on the Conservation Authority. I might recognize them at this point, but I just want to see if Madam CAO has anything in response to Councillor Grant's comments.
I don't. I certainly don't want to portray that there's been anything that's been overlooked with respect to this project. I do believe that the Conservation Authority has I think they actually have a very strong team in place currently, and I think they're trying to manage or mitigate the amount of projects that get done and also understand the limited capacity for funding as well. Something that I think all of us have been, over the last couple of years, there absolutely has been more focus on asset management. But I certainly would welcome comments from the councillors.
So I'll recognize Councillor McIntosh and then Councillor Iba.
The preventive maintenance is above my pay grade, but I know that on that staff, there are 4 professional engineers and quite competent, very good. I'd be very surprised if they're neglecting something. I know Phil Barnes is right on top of everything. We go back to them, the next meeting is May 20th or something. So we go back, they come back, that could affect the application. So I'm not, the lack of maintenance, I'm not concerned about that because I know the people involved, highly qualified people.
Thank you. Councillor Iba?
If I remember correctly, there has been quite a bit of maintenance already at Fly Creek. And I think it's at the point where, maintenance isn't quite enough anymore. And this grant is needed to proceed with a bit more work than just some mandates and some maintenance. So maintenance is definitely, it has been done and will continue to be done after the work is done. But I'm very confident in the staff that they have there. They have an excellent team, and they are continuously updating us on the work, on the projects that benefit the city of Cornwall and beyond.
Okay. Any other questions from
Could
council?
could I continue on just?
Yes, go ahead, Councillor Grant.
Would it be possible to get a copy of their preventive maintenance program? Because we, every company has it that I know of, and it's just a matter of,
Requesting?
if you look at and I'm not crapping on anybody, et cetera, but the corrosion, erosion here didn't happen yesterday. This is over a period of time, and I did lost management control at Domtar, and we would have corrected a lot of these things ahead of time.
Okay. Madam CAO, I'm sure it's appropriate to just touch base with them and see if we can get more information concerning their maintenance program.
Certainly, Madam Mayor, I can ask them for that information. One thing that we have not done, and we've talked about doing, is inviting some of these organizations to come in and present to council. I would imagine, and so years and years ago during the budget process, we sometimes had them come in to present.
I recall.
I think that that's also a mechanism that allows that group to be able to come forward and I think kind of probably project a longer capital plan to council to let you know that these are the things that are on the horizon, maybe in the next 2 or 3 years, the 5 years, the 10-year plans, and I think that might be helpful for council as well. So I think I would also like to maybe recommend that maybe once we get through what is going on currently in our environment today, we invite the Conservation Authority in to do a presentation at council. I'm sure they would appreciate that opportunity, and it would be great for council also.
Okay, point well taken. Thank you. Councillor Gardner.
I'm not going to repeat what Glenn said, but when I was going through this report today, you can tell me you're doing maintenance all you want, but when I see corrosion like that and in different pages, when I see we have to send a diver in to pull up a shaft that a chain was supposed to pull up and the chain broke, I don't think they're doing very good maintenance. So I'm like Glenn, I'd really like to know what kind of maintenance schedule they do have. And I'm not knocking anybody that works there. I think this is terrible to let it go to this point here.
So, Madam CAO will follow up. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Bergeron?
Thank you. I had the same questions, but I suppose the initial question is why would we not be doing this on our own? And I just don't have the history of why the RRCA would. It wasn't in this report. If someone could just.
Sure. Madam
move on
CAO?
that.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understand the question.
Why would we not do this ourselves as a city? Why is the RRCA responsible for it if we have to help fund it?
So I'm going to need a little help here. I think going back to when the conservation authorities were organized, there's certain, I guess, water flows and areas that they're responsible for, so this is within their area of responsibility. And they do that across I don't have a map, I could send council a map of the geographical area that they take a look at. And then within that map, depending on what work is done within some of these waterways, then there is a funding formula that is shared. Some of it overlaps multiple municipalities, so there's a funding formula that might also take into consideration, for example, South Glengarry or South Stormont. But it's based on a geographical area, and it's part of their responsibility to manage. And then through the budget process, the municipalities pay for funding for certain programs and certain capital that's done that affects our areas.
So I suppose, I'll reword the question, because that's
Were you getting at governance more than?
I was getting at why would, is it provincially mandated that they do it, or is it our decision that we handed it over?
That it was provincially mandated, yeah.
There you go.
But,
Thank you.
but as the CIO says, it's complicated because sometimes one area is more involved in the funding than
Okay.
the city and, yeah, depending on
Based
where
on
it is.
it's based on a geographical
Yeah.
area within municipal boundaries.
Thank you.
Definitely provincial governance decided that.
The one, perhaps, Madam Mayor, the one
Yeah, go
benefit
ahead.
of this, though, is that by allowing the Conservation Authority to apply to this program, sometimes you're only allowed, each organization is only allowed to submit one application, and we always submit applications to this fund. So the benefit of, the Conservation Authority, if they're successful with this application, it really does overall benefit the municipality greatly, because it's another avenue for us to access funds for one of these projects that we otherwise wouldn't be able to do.
Any other questions? Councillor McDonald?
Actually, a comment, if I may.
Yes.
Like, I used to sit on the Conservation Authority, and
That's right.
I really enjoyed it. But I know we made it pretty tough for them to get whatever few dollars we gave them, even though we're the biggest funder of the different municipalities. And I think last year, the province cut the budget of all the CAs across the province.
Yes.
So they're probably doing, as best they can, using duct tape where they haven't got the money to do anything else. I think they're doing a super job. with
I just
the
wanna check-
pressures from all the municipalities and the governments,
Thank you. I just want to check in with Councillor DePel. Did you have questions, Councillor DePel?
I'm good, Madam Mayor.
Okay. I'll recognize Councillor Hollingsworth, and I'll come back to you, Councillor Mack. Councillor Hollingsworth?
Thank you, Your Worship. One question, and I think I know the answer, but I want to make sure. Raisin Region submits a budget to us every year, correct? Do they have kind of a capital and operating side when they submit their budget? Because I can't remember.
Through you, Madam Mayor, yes. So they're a relatively lean organization from an operating perspective. And then they do have capital projects that they have identified in different regions for each budget year.
Okay, so that being said, did they, like, the projects that they list, maybe we can debate whether they're capital expenditures or operating expenditures vis-a-vis maintenance. Like, why would they identify these as things they need to do now in April when they could have maybe said in October, and perhaps our representatives might know the answer, I don't know, but why wouldn't they say, oh, by the way, in October or even December when they submitted their budgets, here are some things we're gonna need to deal with or help with moving forward, and here's our timeline. Like, it just, not that it's, I guess it's kind of coming, I was unaware of this moving like until a couple days ago, so I just wonder why we wouldn't have, in light of the fact that we're kind of partnering with them for these projects, why would it be this long before this kind of comes to council?
Madam CIO?
So through you, Madam Mayor, this project would not have been identified as a 2020 project through the funding through the Conservation Authority, their year end, and the province's year end. I believe that the funding is for the March, I guess, the April 1st to March 31st
Fiscal
year.
years.
So they applied for this project, We're hoping that they're going to be successful. And in doing so, they've secured funding for it really for us for next year. So our portion of our costs, we're going to budget for in 2021 and 2022. As far as their priority of their projects, I think kind of getting back to what I said a couple of minutes ago, I think it's worthwhile if council has an interest to have the Conservation Authority come in the fall, and they can talk about their longer-term capital needs and projects that they're anticipating.
In line of that, as one member of council, certainly I would be interested, perhaps. I know we get a lot of presentations and sometimes they seem, but in light of the fact that this is a group we partner with and fund, it wouldn't hurt, I don't think, at least for myself, to be up to speed. And here's our kind of grand vision, if you would, but I'll leave that to council as a whole to kick around. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you. Councillor McIntosh.
I think the idea of the maintenance question is a fair question, and I'm sure that they can answer it. I believe this issue came up last year at the and it was sort of a hang on, and we applied for the funding. And, but I know it was discussed last year. We talked about the diver going down, that kind of thing. But it's been a build-up, and I'm not sure what the maintenance. Glenn knows more about maintenance than I'll ever know. But I have no problems with saying, hey, just curious, what's the maintenance schedule?
So I think we've identified some appropriate follow-up from a presentation perspective, from a maintenance perspective, but we are still looking for a resolution this evening, I believe, and so Councillor Ibao, Councillor Gardner, any further discussion? All in favor? Carried.
In favor.
Thank you, Councillor Dupel. 6.2, Cornwall Small Business Emergency Loan Program. I'm going to turn to the CAO to introduce this matter as well.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So this evening, we have a proposal in front of council for a small business loan. I'm going to hand it over to Mark Wallow to talk about the loan and what it's all about. I think that underlying the real intent is to try and do something that supports our small businesses in our community that have been affected by COVID-19 and what it has done to their business with restrictions from the province to, have them virtually shut down. If council approves the recommendations in front of council this evening, then we would want to be actively issuing a media release tomorrow and trying to get it. We have an application that's drafted and ready to go. We want to try and get moving on that. So perhaps I can refer it back to Mr. Boileau to talk about the program.
Mr. Boileau.
So I think council is somewhat familiar with the program, having received some information from our department already. But I'd like to just speak a little bit about some of the details. So its entire budget is estimated currently at $500,000, although that is if it's fully utilized. We anticipate that about $400,000 of that $500,000 would be repayable or repaid, and $100,000 again maximum would be forgivable. And the forgiveness is really earned by repaying that 4/5, which is the loan portion. There are some details within the report that speak to the eligibility of a business. I'll read them very briefly. It would apply to for-profit companies. It would apply to companies that are situated in Cornwall and operating in Cornwall. It would apply to companies with a maximum employment complement of 25, therefore 25 or less. And it will apply to companies that have seen their businesses adversely affected through COVID. Now, there is additional information that is shown within the report that talks about some of the things that will be looked at in the application. In other words, things like, is the business a non-essential workplace? In other words, it has suffered because it is a non-essential or deemed non-essential by the province. Is it required to cease operations on a day-to-day basis? Did the company have to lay off employees? Have they seen decreases in revenues, disruptions in supply chain, disruptions in external markets? So just to break up the $5,000 that I've described, $25,000 or $2,500, I should say, is an immediate emergency support, and the balance $2,500 is really to try to see a company pivot or perhaps improve its facility to better deal with COVID, and that can be everything from, you know, the shields that you're seeing in stores, to perhaps creating a better setup either online, perhaps allow for curbside to occur in stores where that's not occurring. So that's really trying to explain the financial side of what they would receive. In terms of operating the business, we do have an application form that's been drafted up. I think it's in fairly good form. The finance department was very involved as well in helping with its development. This program would be managed in-house. We expect that there would probably be about 3 people who would be assigned to reviewing, with input from finance as well. And we're looking at a fairly small window, so that we can receive applications and deal with them, if council approves this program, within the next couple of weeks. So a deadline of May 15th to receive the applications. We have received fairly positive feedback from the Chamber of Commerce, as well as the Eastern, not the Eastern Ontario Training Board, the CFDC, the Community Futures Development Fund. So we think it will be helpful. It's certainly not going to satisfy all of the needs that are out there. It's really to assist, together with some of the other programs that will be out there or are out there at other levels of government. But it's something that I think needs to be turned around quickly, because there are some companies, some businesses that are seeing some hardship immediately, and quite honestly need some of this as soon as possible.
Thank you. Questions? Councillor Bennett.
A comment and a question. I do really love the idea of the transitional support of $2,500. Working in a business that's pretty much had to remodel the way you deal with a customer. Plexiglass sounds like a really cheap way to go to protect somebody. It's not. So just for a business to put up a nice barrier between their point of sale and the customer is important, and it's expensive. They may have to look at relining the flow of their store, so that may require minor renovation. It may require just a matter of moving things around, but also has a cost. So I really do like that portion of it. Like it's, I think people are going to need that more than they realize possibly right now. So that's great. So I asked this question during our little Zoom conversation. I just wanted to ask it again, so in case somebody else had the same question, which was, this program becomes so successful that 120 companies apply, but we've got it capped at basically 100 companies. So is that the hard cap, or are we open to coming back to council asking for funding for another 20 businesses?
Mr. Boileau?
Yes, through you, Madam Mayor. I think it's going to be a determination that will be made once we start getting into the next week or so. When applications start coming in, perhaps what we can do at that time is update council as to how many applications we're seeing, and you know, how many qualified applications I should say, because there could be a large number, but perhaps some are not meeting the priorities. But we could certainly communicate that back to council. And if council, feel that there are funds available, and of course we could, I think we would look to the finance department to determine whether we would use the same source. That's possible, I presume. But I think it's really a matter of us going through the process to some extent, and then communicating to council again as to whether we need to put something in place, perhaps for another 2 weeks.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, Councillor Bennett, for your comments. You have been, quite frankly, a frontline worker for the entire time, and your insight is always important. Thank you. I have Councillor McIntosh. I think I saw Councillor Bergeron,
He
and
was
then
ahead of me.
Councillor McDonald.
Eric is ahead of me.
Was he? Okay. Councillor Bergeron, then Councillor McIntosh, then Councillor McDonald. Go
All right.
ahead, Councillor Bergeron.
Thank you. Well, I have a few questions, and one of them was just asked. I'm a little bit concerned about what happens to the 101st business that applies, and so I would love to have a plan in place already. I think, and you can correct me, there's about 2,000 small businesses in our city. Maybe that number is way off. How many of them qualify is probably much lower. But in general, I fully support this. I think we need to be doing whatever we can to help our small businesses, and this is a good start. I have a few other things at our next council meeting that I'd like to talk about. But in general, I support it. I am concerned for business number 101. And so to have that ready would be, I think, valuable for us to make a decision quickly. Some of the questions I do have is why the Brownsfields Reserve? I know at budget we talked about reserves quite a bit, or I did. And I'm just curious why that is the fund, so perhaps to the general manager. Because I potentially think we might need more funds, and I'd like to know where that could come from.
So I'm going to start with the CAO on that.
Sure.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So the program is really tailored off of the model that we follow for our community improvement plans. And within those community improvement plans, there are 2 reserves. So we have a Heart of the City Reserve, and then we also have a Brownfield Reserve. So the Brownfield Reserve right now has approximately $1 million in it. So it can certainly support this program from a cash flow perspective. So we're borrowing from the reserve, and then we're going to pay back the entire amount, the $500,000, over this period for these loans. But then what we'll do in 2021 and 2022 is we'll budget $50,000 a year for that forgivable portion that we are planning to pay out. If council wanted to expand the program, I think we likely would recommend that we still look at that Brownfield Reserve, depending on how far we want to take it, and if not, then we would look at another reserve to potentially fund it. So the real tie-in is kind of, we do have money in reserves that we can borrow from. This is still somewhat related to our CIP program, so that's part of the reason why we selected that particular reserve.
So I suppose the question that I was kind of getting at is what would we not be doing in order to give out these funds? That Brownfield Reserve is usually for development of properties and.
Remediation for development.
So if we saw a need to use the Brownfield Reserve, what we'd do is we'd come back to council with a report and recommend a different financing strategy for what we're doing with this small business loan program.
Great, thank you. I know the CFDC has a program that is similar. Perhaps, Ms. Abuelo, you can explain the difference, how this fund will help a Cornwall business as opposed to their fund, which is also, I think, about $5,000. And maybe is there overlap there in terms of being able to see which businesses need the most help?
Mr. Boileau?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I'm not overly familiar. I understand that program is not yet in place. I'm not sure. I think the biggest difference, quite honestly, is that one may take a little while to get out there, whereas I think there's a need from businesses to put something in place. I suspect that, like the provincial and like the federal applications, you may be able to make application to all of these and perhaps with the CFDC application, a determination would be made as to whether, you know, if you've received the city funds, whether you're a high priority to receive CFDC funds as well. I think that's their call to make, but
I suppose I don't want to see the same 100 businesses get
right.
double the benefits instead of maximizing. And so that's more just to be aware that they do have some funds there for a similar purpose, I think. I still fully support it. I do think it will need to be a bit bigger than what we're proposing. I would also very much like to see, and maybe this requires a motion, that the funds be allocated from a subcommittee of council, that 2 or 3 councillors sit on a committee and approve which of these loans are given out. That's not the proposal here, so perhaps can you walk me through the process that you would take so I can evaluate which I prefer?
Right, so, again, I think we would rely, first of all, we have a fair amount of experience with taking in applications. It was actually my first job 30-something years ago to do that sort of thing. So we've been doing application processing for a lot of years, over 30 years, largely with respect to housing projects, oftentimes with forgivable portions. Of course, we now have CPEG, and we're fairly experienced, and Dana McLean, who heads that up, is, I think, probably the lead on taking this application process. There would be additional staff who would be assigned to this as well, and finance would be there, I think, to monitor, to make sure that we're processing these properly and as per the criteria. The other thing is that, again, time is really important with this, and I think trying to find a time for everyone to get together, and I'm not suggesting that it would necessarily slow it down a lot, but I think our experience is that the administrative level is adequate to process these, but I'm happy to hear any comments that council may have.
I'd like the CAO to as well respond.
I think that part of what we're trying to do is we're just trying to work through a very efficient and expedited process to allow these applications to move. I think that, you know, if we have 100 applications that we're going to approve, I do believe that we have staff that can filter through them pretty quickly. If council has a desire to be involved in that process, then I think we'd want to start to get some times lined up. And then also it's the coordination of getting all of the material and copies made, and you know, whether it's electronic or hard copy, but it's trying to get through all of that. I think that for $5,000, it's not a lot of money, but I have a lot of confidence in the staff that we have right now that can work through them quickly and hopefully get them out and distributed to the small businesses. So that was the intent. The intent is to kind of work through it from a quick and efficient perspective. But it's really up to council to provide us with direction if they'd like to see something different.
So, I
Follow
mean,
up?
yes, I would love to see at least one councillor on that. We're talking about giving out funds, and in the example used, you know, and time is of the essence, and I'm very aware of that. But in other circumstances, that comes back to council for approval of loans that go out. And in this case, it would not. We would be approving the full amount of it. I would personally very much like to see a couple of councillors participating in that for the reasons, not because you don't have the capacity to do it, but because it's kind of going around our normal process. So I don't, does that require a motion, or is that feedback that I can just provide?
I would like to hear from other councillors as well.
So would I. So I'll
You
let
generally
it,
do, so I will do it that way if you're okay with that, Councillor
Yep.
Bergeron.
Thank you.
Did you have any other questions?
No, that's
No?
everything.
Okay. So if, you know, you've heard your colleague, if you want to comment about that, we're having a conversation here, so I'll welcome comments. I'll add you to the list, Councillor Abad. I'm going to go to Councillor McIntosh now.
Well, I'll open up with that. I
Sure.
quite got a lot of confidence in the administration on this one, and as Mark pointed out, time is of the essence here, and anyway, it's no big deal. Back to the, I can speak as a small business owner, and I was
Please
going
do.
to declare a conflict, but my partner last night discussed that we're not interested in going this route. Fortunately, we're well established, and but I'll tell you, March 15th was the last time we took any money in. And people work for you, say, when do we start up again? You go, I haven't got a clue. You know, hoping June 1st, but that's just throwing a dart at the dartboard. A lot of the small businesses are hurting, and no question about it. I really feel that some of them, when they get, if they're going to start up again, it's going to be a tough go. And it's, you can open up the door, but are the people going to come in, especially when you come to restaurants and bars especially? Couple of questions, Mark. When we talk about this, are we talking about the owner or the tenant? Because I think a lot of small business people lease an office space or a building.
Mr. Bullock?
Through you, Madam Mayor, so the application does ask that question of whether it's an owner or a tenant. I think really what we're trying to get to is the business owner. There are situations, of course, where I suppose landlords are businesses as well. So I think that's really something that will be reviewed as we look at this, but I think we're primarily looking at the business owner to fund. And perhaps Ms. Bailey has comments on that, but that's my understanding.
Madam CFO?
Mark is correct, the application is for the business owner. It may be a business owner who owns the property they are, or they may be leasing.
The only question there is, I own the building and I live in Montreal, and I get my $2,500. Do I give that to the guy who's trying to operate the business?
So,
Mr. Bullock?
if I may, so it's important that the business owner operates, owns and operates in Cornwall,
Owns and operates.
in Cornwall,
That's the key word.
right.
Okay.
So,
Madam CEO?
maybe just to clarify, Councillor McIntosh, building owner is in Montreal, the tenant has the business in Cornwall.
Mhm.
The tenant can make the application and
That-
is able to make the application.
That's what I want to
That's
hear.
who we want to support.
Okay, that's the way to go. And do we have any idea percentage of tenants versus owners? People operate a business and own the building too?
Mr.
Not,
Bullock?
it's no big deal, but thought that came to mind.
I wish we had that information. Unfortunately, we don't. In fact, it's very difficult. It's always difficult to know exactly how many businesses there are, period, because it changes, from time to time. Obviously, sometimes for the right reasons, and unfortunately, sometimes for for closure. To answer the point that Councillor Bergeron has raised on how many businesses there are in Cornwall, oftentimes we'll use documents that are at hand. So, for example, the Chamber has a document that tells us how many members there are. That helps us to understand how many there are, and I think Councillor Bergeron's numbers are correct. It's something in the order of what he has described.
Is it 2,000?
2,000 is probably about right.
Okay.
If you look at a document like the Chamber's document, it is more than Cornwall, so it's the region. However, some people are not members, so you wouldn't necessarily, it's not, there isn't a perfect document.
Right.
But, yeah.
I want to go back to the 100. Eric mentioned, I think it was Eric, what happens if I'm number 101? But we're saying you can apply, but not necessarily, you get 200 applications. You're going to pick 100 from maybe 200.
Yeah, we could, just from experience, we could get 100 applications that clearly don't meet our priorities,
That's,
right? So, I mean, we could receive 500 applications. I think that would be difficult if, for example, 250 meet our priorities. I think that's when we would come back to council and say, the program has been very successful, very popular. It's probably going to need more attention.
If you get, I'm not gonna prolong this much longer, but if you get, say you got 500, that is a really, it would take a lot of time to go through 500 applications, decide this guy's worthy, that he's not, maybe he might be, we'll come back to him. It's gonna take some time.
And if I may, the uptake on tax deferral was very high. So I'm just saying that perhaps the uptake on this will be high as well. And if that is the case, I think we'll quickly want to communicate that to council.
Okay. One last question. The successful 100 applicants, will that be made public, or will we know who they are?
I don't think we've given that any thought.
Madam
We're giving out the
I'm
money.
thinking,
Well, it's Madam CAO.
Through you, Madam Mayor, it's a publicly funded program, so I would say that the names should be publicly available. And I think that council should be provided with that information, with a list on the success of the program. Just kind of back to the application process, we're just looking at trying to find a quick way to to get it off the ground, to get it going.
Okay, that sounds good.
I mean, we are held to a very high standard around transparency, Councilor
And
McIntosh.
I'm sure
So you can imagine around
people
the
who don't
finances.
make the grade are gonna be, we're gonna be getting a call saying, you know what, how come why didn't I get that?
So we would not we would not share information on, publicly on unsuccessful applications. We would just share the information
But I'm
publicly
sure
on.
we'll get the complaints. Thank you.
So I have, Councilor Dupel, do you want to be on the speakers list?
Yes, Madam Mayor.
Okay, I'll add you, and then I'll go to Councilor McDonald and then Councilor Gardner.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So, I think this program is designed to be as flexible as it needs to be. So I'm assuming that just as if we had more than 100 people apply and qualify, that we would, obviously, we'd come back here and legitimize the rest of, give citizenship to the others as well. So what about the deadline, though? Is that like hard and fast in 2 weeks' time? I'm just thinking it might be hard for some to turn around all the paperwork they might need. Or would you sort of take their application and tell them in our next round you'd be eligible? Like, let's say if somebody came in on the 16th of May or whatever. Have you thought about that? And if you haven't, don't bother figuring it out now.
I think really, quite honestly, in fairness to the people who need the funds as quickly as possible, I don't think you want the deadline to be too far out.
Right.
Because we need to
Oh, yeah.
set, we need to
You can't give the
prioritize.
first one until you
Right.
get them all. Yeah,
Exactly.
okay. So then, my other question is, a business that's been required to cease day-to-day operations. Now, that's not necessarily a business that's gone out of business.
No.
That's just somebody who's drastically changed their operation. Okay. So, thanks for answering my questions, and I just want to say I'm absolutely confident that in city administration to do this efficiently and quickly and appropriately, and let's not politicize it.
Thank you.
All comers are eligible.
Councilor Gardner.
It's just a question that I'm anticipating, because we're taking it out of the reserves, a lot of folks, taxpayers, are not going to understand whether or not it's going to affect the taxes this year. So I think clarification would be a good thing to put out in the media, that no, it's not going to change the amount of taxes you're paying this year. It's actually coming from reserve. Number one. And number two, I agree with Elaine. I have full confidence in the administration getting this done quickly. The only other question I asked, and when I spoke to Mrs. Adams, who gave us a pretty good breakdown, some of us that were here, about the program itself, was the risk of non-payment for businesses that went under after receiving that. So that's a risk that we're taking, right?
So, Mr. Wallow, and then I'll ask Madam CAO to comment as well. Mr. Wallow?
I'm sure Madam CEO is more qualified than I to answer this, although I would say, yes, there is a risk there. I think there's a risk anytime you award money. There's no guarantee that, for example, I think of our CPEG programs. You know, sometimes we'll provide $7,500 in consulting fees, and the answer is that it's not a good idea, so it doesn't happen. So there are times when you do issue money and there are unfortunately no results. This is a bit that way as well, but.
Madam CEO, and there may be a percentage as well that's sometimes attributed to this kind of risk.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So, to the point of how we determine that allowance, the city looks at, every year we look at outstanding amounts that might be owed to the city, and we work with assumptions to set up an allowance for that. Is also reviewed by our external auditor. So that will be something that is done in the background through the Financial Services Department and our allowances that we set up at the end of the year. Is there risk to this program? Absolutely there's risk. The whole point of this program is to try and provide relief to hopefully prevent some of those businesses that are really affected detrimentally right now. So I would say, yes, there is additional risk, and it's going to go to businesses that might not own property, which typically is easy for the city to recover our funds from, but the whole point of the program is to take a bit of a chance on some of those small businesses and give them an opportunity. Hopefully they'll be able to take advantage of these funds and at least help mitigate what's going on currently.
And just the last comment, I'm fully supportive of this program. I think saving our downtown restaurants and stores, not only the BIA, but the village, is the heart of our city. So I'm fully a supporter of this, and as I said to you 3 days ago, same thing.
Thank you. Madam CEO, did you want to comment on Councillor Gardner's comment about the impact on taxpayers and understanding that?
So we do have a media release planned for tomorrow if the program is successful or at some point. So I think what we could do is we could take a look at whether or not we add a line to that media release to indicate that the program will be funded from reserves and is not taken from, I'm going to look back to Mr. Boileau, and I will speak to, I'm sure that we have a couple of employees who are watching closely tonight knowing that this item's on the agenda, so we'll follow up with that, and if we need to make a minor change to our media release, we'll see what we can do.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I have Councillor Hollingsworth and then Councillor Grant. Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Your Worship. Perhaps a couple of questions. First of all, if we have 100 applicants, they all meet the criteria, they get the money, and I'm the 101st applicant, how quickly and you know, admin for whatever reason decides, okay, you know, we should do this, or we get 10 or 15 more people that meet the criteria, how quickly would we be able to, as a council or as a city or a corporation, to commit the additional money to those extra, like, would it be 2 more weeks before they have to wait for the money, 5 more weeks, like how long? So if I'm in that extra behind everybody else. The second, and kind of subsequent, because I think you can answer this almost at the same time, if we get 120 people and they all meet the criteria, how do we determine who gets the money first if they all technically apply at about the same time?
Madam CEO.
Through you, Madam Mayor. So it's not first come, first served.
Right.
Right, we want to allow all the applications to come in, all the applications will be reviewed. It does, the process does speak to how one business has been detrimentally impacted, right? So I would maybe say, for an example, a business that has been ordered to close with no opportunity for any type of business outside of their operation, they might be more detrimentally affected than a business that can still operate with some type of curbside, online, or takeout type of component, right? There's going to be some businesses that were closed
Okay.
and absolutely forced to close. I think that, you know, there's the applications, I think we would hope, will come in pretty quickly. To Councillor McDonald's comment about the application is not complicated. The businesses should be able to quickly turn around that application and get it submitted, so I don't believe that there's not anything in there that's gonna prevent people from meeting the deadline. When we have our next council meeting, which we're hoping will be on May the 11th, we can maybe provide council with a bit of an indication at that meeting verbally as to what the applications, how many we have received up to that date. We can always come back to the council meeting following to indicate that we think that we need additional funds. So let's say we went through 100 applications, but we have another 40 that we think are worthy. We can come back to council on that following meeting to say we would like another amount of funding for the remaining 40 applications that we still think are worthy of receiving those funds.
Second question. In terms of timeline, so I think it's probably going to pass this evening. I'm getting a sense that the majority of council seems to be on board. So assuming that it passes this evening, how long is it going to take from the time we say great idea tonight to the time people potentially start getting these loans, their money? Like, what kind of timeline are we, when in terms of when you came up with the idea, how soon, if I'm a business, I'm not, but if I were, how soon before I potentially could get the $5,000?
So the media release will go out right away. The application will be on our website right away. We're gonna leave the application open until May the 15th. And then following that, there'll be a clear timeline for administration to try and get through those applications as quickly as possible. And as far as setting up a payment, the city certainly has the capability to issue payments pretty promptly once applications have been approved, right? So will it take a week? Might take a week. I think it depends again on how many applications we receive. Depends on the volume.
Would it be realistic, and I don't want to sort of have a timeline anchored, but would it be realistic to say May 30th, we could have these businesses kind of starting to see some, for those who qualify, a chance to get this kind of revenue stream to help them out?
We think that that's doable.
We can aim for that, but we're not setting a firm date.
I realize-
We sound like Premier Ford here, but.
Well, I'm going
Set a
I'm
firm
going,
date,
I'm
right?
going somewhere with this, your worship.
Okay, go ahead
Just
then.
bear with me, I'm kind of like
Then we will bear with you. Go ahead.
not a lawyer, but bear with. So the idea is this, here's kind of where I'm going. We're looking then realistically at 5 weeks from the time we say, okay, sounds like a good idea, to the time John Q. business person gets their money. Councillor Bergeron suggests that perhaps or one or two politicians could be part of the committee. I notice people roll their eyes or kind of look funny when I say that. But the question is this, that I don't have an answer for. How is it having a couple of politicians who are willing to be available when need be? I think that if you're going to put your name forward, you would have to say, I can be available whenever the committee meets, whether that means 8 o'clock in the morning or 3 in the afternoon. Some of us may not have that option and so forth. But I guess if a politician felt they wanted to participate, they have to be available when everybody else is available because we want to move this forward. So that being said, if we're looking at 5 weeks from the time we say good idea to the time the business person gets their money, the question I can't seem to resolve for myself is how is it having a couple of politicians as part of that committee, how is it they're going to slow down this process? Because that's the sense that I'm getting. We shouldn't have politicians because they'll slow things down. Why is that? What am I missing here?
Madam CAO?
Through you, Madam Mayor, so it's not 5 weeks, it's more like 4, because I believe tomorrow is.
Yeah. April 30th.
Fair enough,
Right?
but I,
Right, so we're gonna have 2 weeks where the applications are submitted, right? So those applications will be accumulating for 2 weeks.
Mhm.
Hopefully we'll get some in quickly so that they can start to be compiled and maybe put together for review. If we receive 200 applications, we're not going to be setting up you're not going to be doing that in a 2 or 3 hour meeting. If we receive 200 applications, it's going to take a couple of days probably to go through those applications, depending on how, I mean, staff can put together a summary, but as far as receiving the applications and going through all of that, really the timeline that we're looking at to review the applications from the 15th to the end of the month, you're looking at a 1 week period.
40 hours a week?
Yeah.
One person, 2 people, 3 people?
Well, again, depending on how the applications come in, we're probably gonna have an individual that's going to be responsible to kind of compile the applications. The applications will probably be put on, I would assume, what we typically do in the city is we put them on a shared drive that everybody can review. But everybody's gonna have to review those applications as well as they're coming in. We do not want to portray any comments that indicate council will slow this process down. That is not our intent.
Okay.
If council wants to be part of this process, absolutely we would welcome council to participate. We're just looking at it from an efficiency perspective to try and get the funds out as quickly as possible. But if there are council members that want to be part of that process, that is absolutely a decision of council. And I put that back for council
Okay.
to provide.
To be fair, the CAO and Mr. Boileau never said they wouldn't want to have council involved.
Perhaps I
And to-
misunderstood in the
so-
sense
so
that I got that
administration-
sort of underlying
No, no,
current
no.
that somehow a
Administration-
politician would grind things to a
No.
halt. And they do sometimes, I'm willing to concede
But
that.
let me just finish, Councillor Hollingsworth.
Sure.
So Mr. Boileau and the CAO did not indicate any resistance to having council involved in the process. And from what I heard so far, and we haven't heard from all of our colleagues yet, from what I heard so far, it's not just about slowing down, but politicizing also the process. So there's a range of comments that have been made, and we haven't heard from everyone yet.
Okay.
Oh, did Mr. Boileau want to respond?
If I may, through you, Madam Mayor, and I don't want to be repeating what the CEO has said, but there will be 3 people working 8 hours a day on this.
Okay.
It's not going to be a meeting or a few meetings.
I understand that. I totally, I
Yeah,
grasp
so
that.
it's 3 people working 8 hours a day for a full week and perhaps more. And the volume of applications is probably gonna be higher than most that I've ever seen in a small volume, right? In a small amount of time. I don't think that we receive applications like this typically. I expect that it's going to be, a lot of work. It's very tedious. So I don't, and again, we have no hesitation with having council involved. I suspect there would be a whole lot of work that needs to be done before it gets to a councillor or a couple of councillors, because unless you want to read through 100 and something, or perhaps more or less, we don't know, and have input on it, we expect that's going to be hours of time.
Back to you, Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Maybe I'll just kind of close that. I concede that it's a lot of time and a lot of work. And I expect the administrators who participate in terms of the weeding through process are gonna be probably, and I say 8 hours because I think that's becomes like the full-time job for whomever gets dedicated to that. And I think that if a counselor or a group of counselors feel they want to be part of it, then they should be prepared to, like, you're going to be here doing whatever amount of time. It's not a 2-hour meeting and away we go. I totally understand that. All I'm suggesting is that if a group of counselors want to participate, how does that, is it workable, or gee, this is a terrible idea that it just has no merit? So all I'm trying to do is to find out exactly what it means. Now, I'm going to back up and go sideways here. Another question that came in the discussion earlier was, and I agree, that I would hate to see a business get funding from 2 or 3 different sources, that our source kind of dries up and they get money from somebody else, another senior level of government, and I'd rather see it dispersed more equitably or more evenly. Is there any way that we could kind of put in terms of a criteria, a provision, that if you've gotten money from some other level of government, that should be noted in your application, and that may, when we talk about Ms. Adams referencing that the companies that are struggling more financially kind of raise to the top. So if somebody is able to access $25,000 or $30,000 from a senior level of government, could we not have that as one of the criteria to say, well, gee, if you've got a pretty good chunk of money from this particular organization, maybe you kind of fall down a little bit because we're going to try to help somebody else. Is there any way we could list that as one of the criteria and mitigating how we deal with it?
So, Madam CAO, I'll ask you to determine who should answer.
So on the application, there is a section where we're asking them if they have accessed other funding programs. And then again, it would come back to who is affected the most, right? So if we see that some businesses have accessed other funding programs and have been successful, or they've applied and we think they're going to be successful, that is going to factor into the review of the application.
So my point is, we've tried to consider that we want to get the most amount of money to the most amount of people as possible, keeping that in mind. Just a comment, Your Worship, then, thank you for your patience. I think it's a good idea. Of course, I'll support it. Quite frankly, whether the politicians are sitting on the committee or politicians are not sitting on the committee, I'm prepared to endorse it either way. Okay.
Thank you, Councillor
We'll see
Holmes.
how it shakes out.
So for the list, I then have Councillor Grant, Councillor Hébert, and then Councillor Dupel. So, Councillor Grant.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think everything that I had in my thoughts were, except a couple things. When we prepared this program, did we do it in consultation with the chamber?
Mr. Boileau.
Yes, both the CFTC and the chamber.
And did either group have any concerns about the number 100?
My understanding is that they were very supportive of the program that's been put forth. So I don't know that they would have had, I mean, to be honest with you, the more the merrier. The greater the better, but I think what we've put forward is a fairly responsible budget. But if we see an overwhelming number of applications that meet the criteria, we'll be back to talk to council.
No, but my point is, did they say you're going to be overwhelmed with this? 100 isn't enough.
No.
So basically, they weren't concerned with the number 100.
I don't believe that was a concern.
Okay.
No.
We talked about, I had a question when we had our Zoom meeting about the committee as well. Having sat on the CPEC committee for a number of years, I feel confident that the group, Dana and the group will do a wonderful job because they're familiar with that process. I'm just wondering, when the applications come in, you're not going to wait until the 15th and review them all at that time, are you? You'll be reviewing them as they come in and checking off the criteria.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay,
Yep.
so it wouldn't take that long anyway.
I would think by the 15th, I would think a week in, we will have a very good idea of volume and appropriateness of the priorities and that sort of thing.
Okay, thanks. When I've been involved as a chair of different campaigns, and we talked about unhonored pledges, and we used to use 10% as I think most of them do. So 10%, so $500,000, $50,000 would be something that.
In terms of the level of risk
Right.
of what we might lose?
Right. That's it. Thank you.
I want to just respond to your comment about Zoom, and Councillor Bennett said it as well, just for the public. We have used Zoom, I've used Zoom to consult with councillors, groups of councillors on things. I find that it's a good thing for us to try and use that technology, get used to it. So I did use it in the last week to try and consult with more than one of you at a time and to take advance feedback concerning this business loan program. So I'm just saying that for the benefit of the public that may be listening. Councillor Hébert and then Councillor Dupel.
Madam Mayor,
Oh.
sorry, Madam Mayor, I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes, Councillor Dupel, go ahead.
Okay, Madam Mayor, I'm sorry if I'm interrupting somebody. It's been a little over an hour and I can't hear anything. I'm going to sign off. It's just all very, very muffled and you can't
Really?
make anything out.
Okay, before you go, I do have you on the speakers list, and I'm sure Councillor Hébert will allow me to have you speak now on the business loan program, and then you can do as you wish, and we'll have to work harder on leaning into our mics and making sure that we can use this teleconference process. Councillor Dupel, go ahead.
Sorry, I just got a little bit upset, Madam Mayor. I didn't hear you.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. So you could speak now on the business loan program.
Okay. I don't know if my questions have already been answered because there's been quite a few councillors speak. I just wanted to know what we were going to do on May 15th if more than 100 applicants have come in, and how we were going, if we did get 120, how were we prioritizing those if they all met qualifications?
So I'm going to go back to to Mr. Boileau, and if you could speak right into your mic.
To try to answer that question, I think our recommendation is that a week into the process, we will.
Sorry, Madam Mayor. Sorry, Mark. I can't hear.
Oh.
Our system needs some work.
Perhaps
So
somebody could write the response to him.
yeah, we will follow up with you directly. Councillor Dupel will send you an email with that response. Mr. Boileau will do that. Okay?
No problem, Madam Mayor. I'm going to sign off.
Yeah, I understand, and this is a work in progress. We apologize.
No problem.
Thank you, Councillor Dupel.
Have a good night.
You too.
You too.
Councillor Hébert.
Awesome.
So I think our webcast is probably better quality. So maybe next time we can have our counselors who are calling in from home, make sure that, no?
There's a delay.
Oh, yeah.
That's why I'm here today, is that he's correct. It's impossible to hear from.
Okay.
Okay, work in progress.
All right. So, okay, so my comments.
Yes.
Which have been said, but I guess it's a conversation. So it's definitely not a committee, this decision. It seems definitely like an administrative process, an administrative duty, and I have full confidence that our staff have the expertise in making these decisions. And I definitely don't want this to get political. So I would not support having politicians at this table. And so I would be supportive of the current recommendation and having it proceed the way that it has been recommended. I also want to point out that social services is currently handing out $4.3 million without political support. So that is completely administrative. It's a huge process. That's a lot of money. That's a ton of applications. I can't imagine throwing counselors in the mix there. So that they have they have our support. They have all the competence to do that work, and I would support this department as well. So when it comes to this project, I am very supportive. I don't think, I wish we could do more, of course, right? And this is scratching the surface. This is helping a little bit. I think it's great that we're asking if they are receiving other kinds of government supports, but I don't think that should make or break us supporting them, because I think, $5,000 isn't going to make or break their. It might really be a great support to make some transitions in their business, but it's not going to be a huge, significant support for certain businesses. So if they are getting other business supports from other levels of government, from other agencies, I would certainly hope that does not discourage their application. I would hope that we continue to support them regardless if they're getting funding from CFDC, if they're getting funding from the federal government. I'm hoping that this $5,000 can be an additional support from other things, because that, if this is on top of something else, then this could really make or break, right? On top of other things, that $5,000 or the $2,500, this is how that can be really helpful. So I'm certainly very much in support of this and really hope that it will make a difference in the business community.
Thank you. Any further comments from council? Councillor Bergeron?
Thank you. If I can just go back to the original idea, which was actually that it not be a political process. That is why I'm suggesting councillors be involved. Ultimately, we're accountable for dollars given out. And in a case like this, normally, if this was presented, at a regular council meeting, the end result would be that it would come back here for approval first. And so what I'm suggesting is, personally, I would love to participate, no matter if it's 40 hours. But having a counselor there means if there is someone who believes that the rules weren't maybe, there will always be someone who believes the rules maybe weren't followed. That's on us as counselors. That is ultimately our responsibility. So that's why I'm suggesting somebody be there. It is not for a lack of confidence in our Economic Development Department or the process. It's that the way we're proposing it, we're approving one big amount of funds, but not participating in how those funds, there won't be anything coming back to council for full approval. So I would love to have one, I would prefer 3 people, but I would love to have at least one person there.
Anything further?
Well, I would make the motion, but I've heard enough comments, so I will make the motion that I would love to, that I could participate in this, if that is a motion.
So I
There's one counselor.
just want to turn to the clerk, because there has been some suggestion about motions, but I'm willing to say that I'm looking for a seconder on this motion. I know this is a special council meeting, but.
It is germane to the main motion.
So I will see if there's a seconder to your motion, Councillor Bergeron. Councillor Hollingsworth.
Can I just have the motion read, so I know exactly, if I'm seconding, you know exactly what it is I'm seconding?
So if I understand it correctly, Madam Mayor, you are the one who appoints council members to different committees. So as much as the wording that Councillor Bergeron indicated he would love to, I will word the motion differently if that's okay. Is the motion to appoint council representative to sit on this election committee.
Okay, I'll second that, Your Worship.
Okay, so debate. Councillor McIntosh?
I have a feeling that Eric is the only one who wants to sit on this committee. I certainly wouldn't want to, if time involved and nice May weather coming up, it's.
Okay.
Basically, if I understand it right, we're appointing a watchdog, basically.
That's what we are.
I know,
So,
but
there's no
on this
discussion
committee-
between you? You go through the chair.
it feels like we're going to send a watchdog over this committee to make sure everything's up and up, and I'm going like, whoa, it's, I don't know, it's,
Okay.
I'm okay with just administration.
Thank you. Councillor Grant, and then Councillor Hollingsworth. Councillor Grant?
Sometimes these things are educational, and I don't have a problem if a counselor wants to volunteer, as long as, if they're not available, they don't set the meetings around the counselor. This is the date of the meeting. You can attend, fine, but if you don't attend, then you can't be part of the process. You have to be fully participant. So I don't have a problem with if somebody wants to volunteer for that committee at all.
Councillor Hollingsworth.
Just, if I might, do we have to still do the mic in light of the, okay.
Please, yeah.
So currently, I sit on a committee, grants committee, which is comprised of administrators and counselors. And correct me if I'm wrong, for those who've sat through it, I thought it has gone fairly well. We've moved through applications, we've had frank and candid discussions, both administrators and counselors as equals. We all say what we think, we vote, we move on, everything just goes hunky-dory. So that being said, Your Worship, I can support the motion. I don't think it's so much as a watchdog as it is, we are ultimately the ones, the proverbial buck stops with us. If anybody has a question, and there are counselors sitting on that committee, they in fact can kind of take the heat off everybody else to say, well, I sat through it, this is how we did it, and this is why we did it, and good enough. I agree with Councillor Grant, whoever or whomever decides to get on board needs to realize that they have to be available. Currently, in my case as an example, I'm still teaching, so if the committee said we're meeting in the morning at 9 o'clock, I probably wouldn't be available. Thus, I will not put my name forward, but I think whoever does needs to realize we want to get this done quickly. That being said, I can support the motion, and as I mentioned, either way I'm going to support the initiative, so it kind of doesn't matter in the long run.
Anybody else on this motion? Councillor Bennett?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Speaking of the Grants Committee meeting, what we need to keep in mind is that it took 4 or 5 meetings over a 4 or 5 week period for 2 to 2.5 hours at a time, and that's not going to cut it for this particular program. So it was great to show up for those meetings for 2.5 hours every week, and as Councillor Hollingsworth stated, it was great communication. It worked really, really well, and we got a lot of work done in those short period of time. So if you're going to appoint someone to this committee, and when we pass that, and I really don't have a problem with it, I just, I mean, if you can't make it to every meeting for 5 days straight for 40 hours, then it's got to move on without you. So I don't have any problem with it, but as long as the person that you, if this passes, that you appoint, has got to make sure that they're going to be there for every minute of it, because I do not want to hold up administration, who, by the way, is more than qualified to do this job. And I do understand Councillor Bergeron's points. It's just that the commitment has got to be there, and we can't afford to hold this up even for a day. So I mean, I will support it, but if you can't make it, then you're told that you got to move on. Thank you.
Councillor Rivera?
So the first round of debate about this, Councillor Hollingsworth said, I don't think this is a terrible idea. I think this is a terrible idea. I'm just going to go on record to say that. Sorry.
You don't agree?
So just my opinion. I'm allowed to state that. This is definitely a watchdog, because this is an administrative task. This is not a committee. Putting that out there again, not a committee. This is admin sifting through hundreds of potentially applications, looking at eligibility, not mushy-feely, and feelings of grant applications when it comes to nonprofits. We do that once a year for budget. This is, do these businesses actually qualify for this funding, check boxes, and then putting them in different piles, making sure that they qualify. If they don't qualify, they go to a different pile. This is an administrative task. This is micromanaging. Pretty sure it's not a council responsibility. So I don't support this whatsoever. And if this passes, I'd be very disappointed in our council.
Councillor Gardner?
No. I don't
Oh,
want-
sorry, I'm sorry, Councillor McDonald.
That's okay.
We'll just finish with Councillor Gardner, and then I'll come back to you. Sorry.
I don't want a counselor sitting on that administration. Will do the job, and they can do the job properly, so I just don't want to hold it up in any way.
Thank you. Sorry, Councillor McDonald, you go ahead.
That's okay. Thank you for the word, Councillor Bear, micromanaging. I think that's what this is, so I don't think it's necessary. Plus, I just think that if it ain't broke, don't fix it. This is not broken. A good plan was laid out. Let's go with it. Clean and mean and quick. So, as was proposed initially.
Okay, thank you. Has everybody spoken? I understand your point, Councillor Bergeron, I do. But I want to think about the Social Service Relief Fund And the fact that that fund is moving to move a lot of money out and is doing so at this point without council watchdog, and I want to be equitable in how I approach that. And so I will be consistent and figure that that's the process. So I'm going to call for the vote now.
Could I just make one point that it's
Councillor Grant.
bothering me with the comment? CPAG is the same type of program, and we have 2 councillors sitting on that. So this isn't different than some we have here, and I don't believe that it's a watchdog. It could be very informative for people who sit on this. Somebody who hasn't sat on it before. So we do already have a process in place that we have councillors reviewing and being part of a process. So to say that we don't, that's erroneous. So anyway, that's
Every councillor can use the language, the appropriate language that they feel makes their point, and that's been done tonight.
but as long as it's correct. It's not correct.
Well, there is a matter of opinion here, and there is some.
Do we not have a CPAG committee that has?
We do, but people can use words like micromanage and watchdog if they want. They can use words like slowing down the process or speeding up the process or bringing extra, they can use all those words.
But not to debate it with you, but just to say that we don't have this type of committee when we do. That's my point. I don't care what words the people use, but it's not right to say we don't have a committee like this because we do. And Councillor McDonald's the chair of the committee, so she.
I'm not sure, Councillor Grant, who you're taking issue with in
I'm
particular.
taking issue with the point that we don't have this, but we do. We do have this in our internal process.
Okay. Does anybody else have any response?
I'm just wondering what the motion is.
Councillor
One
McIntosh?
person or asking for volunteers?
Madam Clerk?
The motion was to amend the original motion to appoint council representative to sit on the selection committee.
Singular. One person.
When we talk about council representation, it's not singular or plural.
Okay.
It's up to the mayor.
Are we ready to call the vote, or does anybody else want to comment? Because I've allowed a second round, so.
Just a clarification, are we voting only on Councillor Bergeron's motion, or is it also his motion and then
Nope, it's Councillor Bergeron's motion.
motion
That's correct.
first,
That is
and
a
then
motion
whether
to
we
amend,
approve
and
the
then we
fund?
go back
Okay.
to
It's a
the
separate
original.
motion.
I understand what's cooking. Thank you.
No
Your Worship.
problem. Everybody ready? All in favor of the motion?
Which is the overall motion?
No, no,
Nope.
no, no.
No, no.
The motion to amend and appoint council representation.
And against?
Tie votes.
Defeated.
Okay. So now we'll go back to the original motion, which is,
That council approve the Cornwall Small Business Emergency Support Loan Program.
now is there any further debate on that? So I'll allow that as well if anybody wanted to make any additional comments. I will make some comments here. I'm very encouraged by this program, and I had questions like Councillor Bergeron about the use of the Brownfield Fund. That is a fund that is very close to my heart because as a councillor, I fought to make sure that that was a well-funded resource because of what it meant for remediation and for development of properties that, you know, needed help and attention and the role that the city could play. So I had those concerns as well in terms of that. But I feel like right now, our small business community, which is the heart of our local economy, which is the heart really of a provincial economy, need our help right now. And so I was very happy to see administration step forward and elaborate a good process. And I want to thank the CFDC and the local Chamber of Commerce and Andrew Seguin. All of these folks have been instrumental in supporting small business, and I think they've done a really great job, and they've provided good feedback on this program. So I just wanted to publicly thank them. And I will call for a vote on the program. All in favor?
Madam Mayor, if I may, We started the discussion without getting a mover and seconder
Oh,
for
did
the
we?
main motion.
Thank you. It was a long discussion. Who would like to move and second this?
Get over here in the corner.
Oh, gosh, okay, so
Take your pick.
Counselor Bergeron and Counselor Gardner? All in favor? Against? Thank you, Madam Clerk, for that reminder. Next item on the agenda. 6.3, Social Services Relief Fund. Madam CAO.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We're just going to allow a little bit of logistics with some movement of the chair so that we can get our Manager of Social Services suitably located in a mic.
Thank you, Mr. Boileau, for wiping down your area. These things are important. We smile, but we know that they're of vital importance.
We wanted to bring a report back to council just to provide a brief update on the Social Services Relief Fund. Part of that fund has now been received. Applications have been received. Stacy's group is working through those applications. Within the report, there's been indications of what types of applications we've received and what those needs are. There is also a component that allows some funding for municipalities. So when we move on to the final report on tonight's agenda, you'll also see that the CFO has indicated some of the expenditures that we have are going to be funded from this fund, namely things like PPE. I was also on a call this afternoon with the CAOs in the lower tiers to also talk to them about their eligibility to look for some assistance with this fund. The fund can be used to help them with some of their costs to adapt to what has occurred as well. So I think with this, I'd like to hand it over to Mrs. Ferguson and let her maybe just speak briefly about the report and take any questions from council.
Ms. Ferguson.
Sure, thank you, Madam Mayor.